A crowded plaza, where Willow Heart's haunting melody stops strangers in their tracks, her black hair swaying as she plays a song born of loss, a shipwreck, a betrayal, a love she was forced to abandon. Across the street, Preston Blake, a millionaire hardened by years, hears their shared tune and finds his past alive in her notes. What follows is a journey of rediscovery, a chase through shadowed alleys, a confrontation with a father's sins, and a stage where music speaks louder than lies. From heartbreak to a legacy of healing, their story weaves passion, redemption, and the courage to reclaim what was stolen. Before you drift to sleep, rate this tale 0-10 in the comments. Will Willow and Preston rewrite their ending? Stay until the final note. You'll want to know. Sweet dreams, listeners. The city plaza throbbed with the restless energy of late afternoon. A cacophony of horns, hurried footsteps, and voices colliding like waves against the concrete shore. Sunlight slanted through glass towers, casting jagged shadows over the old stone fountain at the plaza's heart, where water gurgled faintly, as if too tired to compete with the urban din. Vendors hawked overpriced coffee and pretzels, their calls blending into the chatter of suited businessmen, tourists snapping photos, and students weaving through the crowd with earbuds dangling. It was a place where no one lingered, where time pushed forward relentlessly, until a sound rose, delicate yet commanding, slicing through the chaos like a blade of light through fog. It was the cry of a violin. The notes began softly, almost tentative, as if testing the air, then swelled into a melody that seemed to weep and hope in the same breath. Passers-by faltered mid-step. A woman clutching a briefcase slowed, her eyes drifting from her phone. A teenager pulled out an earbud, head tilting toward the sound. Even the pigeons, scattered by a child's shout, seemed to pause, their wings stilled for a moment. The music curled around the plaza, wrapping itself around ankles, climbing spines, and settling into hearts with an ache that felt both foreign and familiar. It was too pure for this place of metal and haste, too raw for a world that hurried past pain. At the center of it all stood Willow Heart. Her raven black hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the fading light like polished obsidian, swaying slightly as she leaned into her violin. Her eyes were closed, her face serene yet taut, as if the world behind her eyelids held the only truth that mattered. Her modest coat, frayed at the cuffs, did little to diminish her presence. She was a figure carved from music itself, her bow gliding across the strings with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. The violin case at her feet lay open, a few coins glinting inside, but she played not for money. She played because the silence would drown her otherwise. The melody was one she had carried for 15 years, a composition born in the glow of youth, when love was a promise and the future a canvas of light. She had played it 1,000 times in her mind, but never aloud, not since the day her world collapsed. Each note was a memory, a dock shrouded in mist, a ship that never returned, a man whose laughter once anchored her heart. Every stroke of the bow opened a wound, yet also set it free. The music a bridge between the girl she had been and the woman she had become. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of what she released. Grief for her parents, lost in a shipwreck, anger at the betrayal that tore her from her love, and a stubborn, aching hope she could not extinguish. The crowd grew, a semicircle of strangers drawn by the sound, some whispering, others silent, all caught in the spell of her performance. A man in a tailored suit dropped a bill into her case, his eyes lingering not on her face, but on the music, as if it spoke a language he'd forgotten. A young girl tugged her mother's hand, pointing, her mouth forming a silent wow. Willow didn't see them. Her mind was far away, on a grassy hill where she once lay with her head in a boy's lap, her violin resting beside them as they dreamed of a life where nothing could break them. The memory stung, but she leaned into it, letting the pain fuel the soaring crescendo, the notes climbing higher, sharper, until they seemed to hang in the air like stars. Across the street, a sleek black car pulled to the curb, its door opening to reveal Preston Blake. At 32, he was a man sculpted by ambition, his jet black hair neatly combed, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection. His phone was pressed to his ear, his voice clipped as he navigated a boardroom crisis, a merger teetering, a press leak threatening his empire. He stepped onto the sidewalk, his polished shoes clicking, his mind a storm of numbers and strategies. Then the violin reached him. He froze. The melody wasn't just familiar. It was theirs. The same one Willow had composed at 17, when they were reckless and in love, when she'd play it barefoot on the campus lawn, her laughter brighter than the sun. For a moment, Preston wondered if he was losing his mind. The morning had been brutal. Endless meetings, betrayals in the boardroom, a life built on control now fraying at the edges. But this sound, it yanked him from the present, hurling him back to a time when his heart was unguarded, when a girl with wild spirit and music in her veins had been his entire world. He lowered the phone, the voice on the other end fading to static, and turned toward the plaza. The crowd parted slightly, and there she was. Willow. Older, yes. Thinner, paler, her face etched with lines of a life he didn't know. But, unmistakably her, the same fierce grace, the same fire in the way she played. Preston's breath caught, his chest tightening, as if the air had turned to glass. He took a step forward, then stopped, afraid the moment would shatter if he moved too quickly. She finished the piece, the final note lingering like a sigh, and opened her eyes. The crowd erupted in soft applause, coins clinking into her case, but Willow's gaze swept the plaza, unfocused, until it landed on him. Their eyes locked. Shock flashed across her face, raw and electric, like lightning splitting a calm sky. Her body stiffened, her fingers clenching the violin so tightly, her knuckles whitened. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then she turned, swift and deliberate, gathering her case with practiced hands. "Willow!" Preston called, his voice breaking through the plaza's hum. But she was already moving, her steps quick, her head low. He stepped off the curb, ignoring the honk of a car, the curse of a passerby, and pushed through the crowd. "Wait!" She didn't. She crossed the street, slipping between a vendor's cart and a cluster of tourists, her black hair a fleeting shadow in the fading light. Preston broke into a jog, his heart pounding. Not just from the chase, but from the impossible truth that she was alive. Alive, and here, 3 blocks from his office, playing the song that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. He reached the edge of the plaza, scanning the sea of faces, the blur of motion and color. Left, right, spinning. He saw nothing but strangers. He stood still, the weight of her absence crashing down harder than it had in years. The last time he saw her, she'd stood at a harbor's edge, tears in her eyes, her voice cold as she said she didn't love him, that he wasn't enough, that she was leaving for someone else. He'd believed her then, a boy too broken to question the lie. Now, her fear told a different story. Something was wrong, something deeper than time or distance. "Sir, you all right?" a woman asked, pausing with her stroller. He nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere, already planning. Willow was alive and she was running, but this time, he wouldn't let her disappear, not without answers, not without the truth. The city's pulse faded as Preston Blake stood at the edge of the plaza, the echo of Willow's violin still ringing in his ears. Her sudden flight had left him reeling, the sight of her pale, panicked face searing itself into his mind. 15 years had passed since she'd vanished, since her cold words on that fog-drenched dock had shattered him. But the woman who fled today was no ghost. She was real, alive, and terrified. The realization churned in his gut, a mix of hope and dread that drove him back to his penthouse, where the city glittered coldly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. He poured a whiskey he didn't drink and sat in the dark, his eyes fixed on the violin case she'd left behind all those years ago. Its leather was worn, the clasp rusted, but he'd never opened it, as if doing so would unravel the last thread of her he'd clung to. Preston's life had been built on control. Boardrooms conquered, deals sealed, a fortune amassed to drown the pain of her betrayal. But now, that betrayal felt like a lie. Her eyes in the plaza hadn't held the indifference she'd claimed at 17. They'd held fear, sharp and raw, as if he were a threat she couldn't face. He replayed their last moments together, her voice trembling as she said she didn't love him, that she'd found someone else. He'd believed her then, too young to see the cracks in her story, too broken to chase her. Now, the memory felt wrong, like a song played out of tune. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus, a private investigator whose discretion had saved Preston's company from more than one scandal. "I need you to find someone," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Willow Hart. She's alive, playing violin at a bar on Westbridge. Thursdays, maybe other nights. I need to know where she goes, what she's hiding." Marcus's pause was brief, professional. "Thought she died in that shipwreck with her parents." Preston's jaw tightened. "So did I. But she's here and something's not right." Sleep eluded him that night. He paced the marble floors, memories of Willow flooding back. Her laugh, bright as summer. The way her fingers danced on the strings. The crescent moon necklace he'd given her, glinting against her collarbone. By morning, Marcus had a lead. Willow played at the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar where the neon flickered and the air smelled of stale beer. Preston drove there himself, the sleek lines of his car out of place among the cracked pavement and graffiti. He parked in the shadows, his heart a drumbeat as he waited, the plaza's chaos now a distant hum. The bar's back door creaked open just past midnight, and Willow stepped into the alley, her violin case slung over her shoulder, a scarf pulled high against the chill. Her black hair caught the street lamp's glow, framing a face that was both familiar and foreign, older, sharper, etched with a weariness that hadn't been there at 17. She moved with purpose, head down, until Preston stepped forward, his voice cutting through the quiet. "You play better than I remember, Willow." She froze, her hand tightening on the case, her eyes snapping to his. "Leave me alone, Preston," she said, her voice low, edged with something brittle. She turned to go, her steps quick, but he followed, keeping his distance yet closing the gap. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Tell me why you ran today." She spun, her scarf slipping to reveal the sharp line of her jaw. "I don't owe you anything. I said everything 15 years ago." Her words were a blade, but her voice trembled, betraying her. Preston stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You said you didn't love me, that I wasn't enough, that you were leaving for someone else. But your eyes in the plaza, they told a different story. You were scared, Willow, of me." She laughed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed off the alley walls. "You think you know me? You never did." But her gaze flickered, and he pressed on, voice soft but unrelenting. "I know you didn't leave by choice. Something happened. Someone made you run." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked like the girl he'd loved, vulnerable, fierce, her heart laid bare. Then her expression hardened. "You want the truth. They threatened you, Preston. Your life for my silence. I had to go." The words landed like a blow, stealing his air. "Who?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Who did this?" She looked away, her fingers clutching the strap of her case. "Your father," she whispered. "His men. They came after the shipwreck. Said if I stayed, you'd be next." Preston's world tilted. His father, Everett Blake, the man who'd built an empire on ruthlessness, had always been a shadow over his life. Demanding, cold, a master of control. But this? Orchestrating Willow's disappearance, threatening her, tearing them apart? It was a betrayal deeper than he'd imagined. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I would have fought for you." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "You were a boy, Preston. You couldn't fight them, and I couldn't watch you die." She turned again, her steps faster now, the alley swallowing her silhouette. "Willow, wait!" he called, but she didn't stop, her scarf a fleeting slash of color as she rounded the corner. He started after her, then stopped, his fists clenched, his mind racing. The truth she'd dropped was a live wire, sparking questions he couldn't ignore. His father had lied, not just to him, but to the world, burying Willow's family in a tragedy that was no accident. The shipwreck, her parents' deaths, her disappearance. It was all connected, and Preston felt the weight of it pressing against his ribs. He returned to his car, the city's neon blurring through the windshield. Willow's words echoed, "Your father, his men." He'd spent years building a life in Everett's shadow, proving himself worthy of the Blake name. Now, that name felt like a curse. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Marcus's number. "Dig deeper," he told him when the call connected. "Find everything you can on my father's dealings 15 years ago. Financial records, the shipwreck, anything tied to Willow Hart's family. And keep tabs on her. I need to know she's safe." As he drove back to his penthouse, the city's lights felt colder, sharper, like they were watching him. Willow was alive, but she was running, not just from him, but from a past that still hunted her. He wouldn't let her face it alone. Not this time. The boy who'd let her go was gone, replaced by a man who'd tear down an empire to find the truth. And as the first stars pierced the night sky, Preston knew this was only the beginning. A melody interrupted, but not yet finished. The night air clung to Preston Blake like a second skin, heavy with the scent of damp asphalt and the faint tang of spilled beer from the rusty anchor's overflowing bins. He leaned against the alley wall, the brick cold against his back, his breath shallow as he watched the bar's back door. Willow's words from their brief encounter days ago. "Your father, his men. They said if I stayed, you'd be next," had burned through his sleep, leaving him raw and restless. His father, Everett Blake, a titan of industry, had orchestrated her disappearance, and the weight of that truth pressed harder with every passing hour. Preston had sent Marcus digging into Everett's past, but answers were slow, and Willow was still a shadow slipping through his grasp. Tonight, he'd find her again, not to chase, but to listen. The door creaked open, and Willow stepped out, her violin case slung over her shoulder, her black hair tucked beneath a scarf that fluttered in the breeze. Her posture was wary, her eyes scanning the alley before settling on him. She froze, her hand tightening on the strap, her face a mask of resignation and defiance. "You don't give up, do you?" she said, her voice low, cutting through the hum of distant traffic. Preston pushed off the wall, his hands in his pockets to keep them steady. "Not when it's you, Willow." He kept his tone soft, but there was steel beneath it. A resolve forged in the hours he'd spent unraveling the lies of his past. "I need to understand. Why did you run in the plaza? Why are you still running?" She laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the graffiti-streaked walls. "You think you can just walk back into my life and demand answers? I told you what happened. Your father made sure I had no choice." She took a step toward the street, But Preston moved to block her path, not close enough to crowd her, just enough to hold her gaze. "I'm not him," he said, his voice rough with urgency. "I'm not the boy who let you go without a fight. But I can't fix this if you keep shutting me out. Tell me what they did to you." Her eyes flashed, a storm of pain and anger. And for a moment, he thought she'd bolt again, but she didn't. She stood her ground, her scarf slipping to reveal the sharp angle of her jaw, the faint scar above her brow he hadn't noticed before. "You want to know?" she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "After the shipwreck, I was alone. My parents were gone, my home was gone, and I was 17, Preston, with nothing but a violin and a warning. Your father's men found me in a motel, 2 days after I buried what was left of my family. They didn't ask. They told me if I ever contacted you, if I ever came back, you'd be the one to pay. A car accident, a fall, something clean and quiet." I believed them. Preston's stomach twisted, bile rising in his throat. He'd spent years hating her, believing she'd chosen to leave, while she'd been running to save him. "Why didn't you trust me?" he asked, the words scraping out. "I would have protected you." Her laugh was sharper now, cutting deeper. "Protected me? You were a kid, just like me, living under his roof, his rules. You worshipped him, Preston. You wouldn't have believed me over Everett Blake." She shook her head, her eyes glistening under the street lamp. "I wanted to tell you every day, but I saw what they did to my parents. That ship didn't just fail, it was sabotaged. My father had found something, records of your father's deals, money funneled through fake charities. He was going to expose it, and then he was gone." The alley seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, as her words painted a picture too vivid, too cruel. Preston's hands clenched in his pockets, his mind racing to the articles he'd read as a teenager. Mechanical failure, tragic accident, no survivors. He'd mourned her parents, mourned her, never questioning the story. "You've been carrying this alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All this time." Willow's gaze softened, just for a moment, before hardening again. "I had to. I've lived in shadows, changed my name, and moved cities when I thought they were watching. I came back here because I was tired, Preston. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. But seeing you..." She broke off, her breath hitching. "It's like opening a wound I thought I'd stitched shut." He took a step closer, careful, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm not your enemy, Willow. I didn't know. But I do now, and I'm not letting this go. Not you. Not the truth." He reached into his coat and pulled out the crescent moon necklace, its silver glinting in the dim light. "I found this in my things after you left. You used to wear it every day. It's yours." Her eyes widened, her hand rising as if to touch it, then falling. "I thought I'd lost it," she whispered, her voice raw. "I wore it until it hurt too much to remember you." She looked at him, her expression a tangle of longing and fear. "You can't fix this with a necklace, Preston. You can't undo 15 years. "I am not trying to undo it," he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "I'm trying to start again, whatever it takes." He held out the necklace, and she hesitated, her fingers brushing his palm as she took it. The contact was brief, electric, a spark that carried the weight of all they'd lost. She stepped back, clutching the necklace, her scarf fluttering as a gust swept through the alley. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Your father's not done with me. If he knows I'm here, if he knows we're talking..." She stopped, her eyes darting to the shadows as if expecting someone to emerge. Preston's jaw tightened. "He won't touch you. I'll make sure of it." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Everett Blake was a man who bent the world to his will, and Preston had only begun to see the depth of his ruthlessness. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and promise safety, but the distance between them felt like years, not steps. Willow turned, her violin case bumping against her hip. "I need time," she said, her voice barely audible. "Don't follow me tonight." She walked away, her silhouette shrinking into the neon haze, the necklace still in her hand. Preston stood rooted, the alleys chill seeping into his bones. He didn't follow, but his resolve hardened, a fire kindled by her truth. Back in his car, he dialed Marcus. "Focus on the shipwreck," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Find the investigators, the witnesses, any trace of sabotage, and check my father's financials from that year. Charities, shell companies, anything that smells like a cover-up." Marcus's reply was curt. "This is going to get ugly, Blake." Preston stared at the empty alley. "It already is." As he drove into the night, Willow's face lingered, her fear, her strength, the necklace glinting like a promise. She'd run to save him once. Now, he'd fight to save her, even if it meant tearing down everything his father had built. The city's skyline loomed like a jury of steel and glass as Preston Blake drove through the pre-dawn haze, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Willow's words in the alley, "Your father's not done with me," had ignited a fury that burned hotter with every new revelation from Marcus's reports. The shipwreck that killed Willow's parents was no accident. Financial records, buried under layers of shell companies, linked Everett Blake to a sabotage meant to silence Thomas Hart's discovery of fraudulent charities. Willow had been coerced into vanishing, her love for Preston twisted into a leash to keep her silent. The crescent moon necklace, now back in her hands, was a fragile bridge between them. But Preston knew time was slipping away. He had to act before Everett's shadow found her again. Marcus's latest findings waited on Preston's desk. A scanned document from 15 years ago, a payout to a now-deceased engineer who'd certified the ship's faulty mechanics, and a witness statement, retracted days later, hinting at tampering. The evidence was damning but incomplete, a puzzle missing pieces only Everett could provide. Preston's resolve hardened. He needed to confront his father, not as a son seeking approval, but as a man demanding truth. He pulled into the Blake estate at dawn, the cliffside mansion stark against the rising sun, its iron gates like bars to a prison he'd once called home. Everett sat in his study, a glass of scotch in hand despite the hour, his tailored robe immaculate. The room smelled of leather and old money, its walls lined with books he never read and awards he didn't earn. "You're early," Everett said, not looking up from his tablet, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Or desperate," Preston closed the door, his pulse a steady drumbeat. "I know about the shipwreck," he said, his tone cold, unyielding. "The payoffs, the sabotage, the threats to Willow Hart. You didn't just destroy her family, you made her disappear to save your empire." He tossed a folder onto the desk, printouts of Marcus's findings spilling across the mahogany. Everett's eyes flicked to the papers, then back to his son, one eyebrow raised. "You've been busy," he said, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "Digging up ghosts won't change the past, Preston. It was business. Thomas Hart was a liability. His audit would have collapsed our expansion. The ship was a regrettable necessity." "Regrettable?" Preston's voice cracked, fury rising like a tide. "You killed her parents. You threatened her life, forced her to lie to me, to run. I spent 15 years hating her, thinking she betrayed me, while you played God with our lives." His fists clenched, nails biting into his palms. "How do you justify that?" Everett stood, his presence commanding despite the faint tremor in his hand. "You were a boy, soft and distracted. If I'd let her stay, you'd have thrown away your future for a girl with nothing. I gave you ambition, Preston. I gave you power. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. The men we dealt with then weren't forgiving. If Hart had gone public, we'd have lost everything, maybe even you. Preston's blood ran cold, but he held his ground. You didn't save me, you broke me, and her. He turned, unable to stomach his father's face. The man he'd once idolized, now a stranger. I'm done protecting your lies. I'm going to find her, and I'm going to make this right. Everett's voice followed him to the door, calm but barbed. Be careful, son. Truth has a price, and you're not the only one who pays it. The warning lingered as Preston drove to Westbridge, the city waking around him. He needed to see Willow, to tell her he believed her, to prove he wasn't his father's shadow. The rusty anchor was shuttered, but Marcus had tracked her to a nearby diner where she sometimes lingered after late sets. Preston found her in a corner booth, her violin case beside her, a cup of coffee untouched. Her black hair was loose, framing a face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes sharpened when she saw him. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice low, glancing at the door as if expecting trouble. I told you to stay away. Preston slid into the booth across from her, his heart pounding. I confronted my father. He admitted it. The shipwreck, the threats, everything. He said it was to protect his empire, but I don't care about his reasons. I'm sorry, Willow. I believed his lies about you, and I let them poison me. He reached into his pocket and set the crescent moon necklace on the table, its silver glinting under the diner's fluorescent light. You dropped this in the alley. I kept it safe. Her fingers hovered over the necklace, then curled into a fist. You think this fixes anything? She asked, her voice trembling. I wore it through hunger, through fear, through nights I thought I'd die. It was all I had of you, and it hurt every time I looked at it. She met his gaze, her eyes a storm of pain and defiance. You can't just show up and play hero, Preston. I'm not trying to, he said, leaning forward, his voice raw. I'm trying to be the man I should have been. I want to fight for you, for us, if you'll let me. He pushed the necklace closer, a silent plea. She looked at it, her breath catching, then took it, her fingers brushing the pendant. I don't know what I can give you, she said, her voice softer now. I'm not the girl you loved. I'm what's left after she broke. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed, and she glanced at a headline on the screen. Blake aired a wed-banking heiress in strategic alliance. Her face drained of color, her hand closing around the necklace like a vice. Willow, that's not... Preston started, but she was already standing, grabbing her violin case. You're just like him, she said, her voice ablade. You talk of truth, but you're still his pawn. She pushed past him, the diner door slamming behind her. Preston sat frozen, the headlines lie a gut punch. Everett's doing, no doubt, a move to secure a merger and tighten his grip. He paid the waitress and ran after her, but the street was empty. Willow gone like smoke. His phone rang, Marcus, with news of a witness willing to talk about the shipwreck, but only if Preston moved fast. As he sped toward the meeting, his mind was on Willow, the necklace, and the fragile trust he'd lost. The truth was within reach, but its cost was climbing, and he feared she'd pay it before he could stop it. The city's neon veins pulsed as Preston Blake sped through its arteries. The sting of Willow's words. You're just like him, cutting deeper than the cold night air. The headline proclaiming his engagement to a banking heiress was a lie. A chess move by his father Everett to lock in a merger and bury the truth about Willow's family. She'd vanished from the diner, her violin case a fleeting shadow, leaving Preston with the weight of her distrust and a witness's name from Marcus. A retired investigator who'd seen the shipwreck's sabotage, but stayed silent for 15 years. The meeting had yielded a name, Vincent Hale, Everett's silent partner, and a warning. Exposing the truth would burn bridges Preston couldn't rebuild. But as he parked outside a vine-draped cafe where Marcus had traced Willow, bridges were the last thing on his mind. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of espresso and murmured conversations. Willow stood on a small stage, her black hair catching the amber glow of string lights, her violin singing a melody that was both fierce and fragile. The crowd was small, but rapt, their eyes fixed on her as she played, each note a defiance of the years that had tried to silence her. Preston stood at the back, his heart a knot of longing and regret. She hadn't seen him yet, and he didn't move, letting her music wash over him, a reminder of the girl who'd once dreamed with him and the woman who'd survived without him. When the set ended, the applause was soft but heartfelt. Willow bowed slightly, her face unreadable, and began packing her violin. Preston stepped forward, his throat tight. "Willow," he said, his voice low but clear. She stiffened, her hands pausing on the case, but she didn't look up. "The headline was a lie," he said, stepping closer, ignoring the curious glances from patrons. "My father's doing, not mine. I ended it, publicly. The merger, the engagement, all of it. I'm done with his games." Her eyes met his, sharp and searching, the crescent moon necklace glinting at her throat. "You expect me to believe you?" she asked, her voice a blade honed by years of betrayal. "You're a Blake. Lies are your blood." The words stung, but Preston held her gaze, his own steady. "I'm not him, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm the man you once loved." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the case, then shook her head. "I don't know if that man exists anymore." But she didn't walk away, and that was enough for Preston to cling to. He left the cafe with a fragile hope, her music echoing in his mind as he prepared for the next move. A charity gala where Everett's influence loomed, and where Preston would lay bare the truth. The gala's concert hall shimmered with opulence, its chandeliers casting prisms over a sea of tuxedos and gowns. The city's elite filled every seat, their whispers buzzing with rumors of Blake Industries' turmoil, stocks dipping, boardroom battles, and Preston's public rejection of the heiress. He stood backstage, his suit crisp but his jaw tense, watching Willow adjust her black gown, the necklace a quiet rebellion against her collarbone. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. She met his eyes, her own fierce. "I've played for strangers my whole life. Tonight I play for me." Her words carried a strength that steadied him, and he nodded, stepping into the spotlight as the host introduced him. The applause was polite but strained, the crowd sensing a storm beneath his calm exterior. "Good evening," Preston began, his voice clear, unyielding. "This gala celebrates legacy, but not the kind built on wealth or silence. 15 years ago, my family destroyed a woman I loved. They sabotaged a ship, killed her parents, and forced her into exile with threats against my life. I believed their lies, and my silence made me complicit. Tonight, that ends." The room fell silent. A collective breath held as he stepped aside, the spotlight shifting to Willow. She emerged, ethereal yet grounded, her violin raised like a sword. The piece she played, 15 years, began with a whisper, notes tentative as footsteps on a forgotten path. It grew into a storm of dissonance, the sound of a girl torn from love, a family burned to ash, a life rebuilt from scraps. Her bow danced, fierce and graceful, each stroke a reclaiming of her voice. The audience sat stunned, some wiping tears, others gripping their seats, caught in the raw power of her truth. The melody softened, not to innocence but to resilience, its final notes rising like dawn after a long night. As the last vibration faded, the hall erupted, a standing ovation that shook the chandeliers. Willow opened her eyes, her gaze finding Preston's in the wings, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Not absolution, but a shared defiance. He stepped forward, taking the microphone. "That was 15 years," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Willow wrote it in an alley, running from a past my family created. She chose to play tonight. She chose to speak, and I choose to stand with her, not as a Blake, but as the man who loves her." He pulled a faded photo from his jacket, a snapshot of them at 17, arms around each other, smiles untouched by cruelty. "This is who we were," he said, holding it up. "And this," he turned to Willow, "is who I want to be, for you." Her hands trembled, the violin still at her side, but she stepped closer, whispering for him alone. "You're late, Preston, but you're here." The crowd faded, their applause a distant hum as they stood inches apart, their eyes locked in a fragile, necessary truth. Everett, seated in the front row, rose slowly, his face gaunt, his cane trembling. He didn't clap, but his gaze lingered on his son, a flicker of something, regret perhaps, before he turned and left. Preston didn't care. The stage was theirs, and for the first time, the truth was louder than the lies. The echo of Willow's violin lingered in Preston Blake's mind as he stood outside the old city conservatory, its weathered arches now gleaming under a fresh coat of white paint. 3 years had passed since the gala, where Willow's 15 years had shaken the concert hall, and Preston had bared his family's sins to a stunned elite. That night, Everett's silent departure marked the end of his shadow over their lives. But the cost was steep. Preston's reputation scorched, contracts lost, and Blake Industries, a battlefield of lawsuits. Yet, as he watched children stream through the conservatory's doors, clutching violins and dreams, he felt no regret. The Melodia Institute of Music and Healing, born from their shared scars, was a legacy worth more than any boardroom victory. Willow stood in the garden, her black hair catching the morning breeze, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach. Their daughter, Lyra, was a quiet miracle, conceived against the odds of their fractured past. At 6 months pregnant, Willow glowed with a strength Preston had always loved, her crescent moon necklace glinting as she adjusted a young student's violin bow. The Institute, funded partly by Everett's estate, his deathbed confession a reluctant atonement, had transformed a crumbling hall into a sanctuary. Its mission was bold: to weave music with emotional resilience, offering therapy through melody for survivors of trauma, young and old. Preston knelt beside a girl struggling with her violin case, his smile soft as he adjusted the strap. "You'll get the hang of it, Mia," he said, and she grinned, racing off to her lesson. He joined Willow, his hand brushing hers, their fingers entwining briefly. "You're a natural," she teased, her voice warm but laced with the weight of their journey. "Better with kids than you ever were with boardrooms," he chuckled, but his eyes lingered on her, tracing the lines of a face that had survived too much. The gala had been a turning point, but healing was a slow dance, each step a choice to trust again. The Institute's halls buzzed with life, students practicing scales, therapists leading group sessions where music unlocked buried grief, and Willow's class, Strings of Memory, teaching survivors to compose their pain into song. Preston lectured on musical entrepreneurship, redirecting his wealth to fund scholarships, but it was their co-led recitals that drew crowds, each performance a testament to resilience. The Room of Reckoning, a new wing named to honor truth over legacy, bore a bronze plaque. "Truth sings where silence fails." It housed Everett's donated art collection, but no Blake crest adorned its walls, only stories of those who'd found their voice. One evening, as golden light poured through stained glass windows, Willow sat at an antique piano, her fingers tracing the keys of spring's return, a new arrangement of the melody she'd once played in the plaza. Preston watched, leaning against the doorway, Lyra's future, a quiet hope in his chest. "Still sounds like you," he said, his voice low, but lighter somehow. She nodded, not pausing. "It's not about forgetting the winter. It's about believing in spring." Her words, simple yet profound, mirrored the Institute's heart, a place where scars became symphonies. A letter had arrived that week from Vincent Hale, Everett's former partner, now leading Hale Enterprises. Everett's final days, spent battling a wasting illness, had yielded a signed confession: the shipwreck's sabotage, the forged letters blaming Willow, the bribes to silence witnesses. Vincent offered the Blake estate's remaining assets to expand Melodia, with one condition: to name a wing after Everett. Preston had read the letter in silence, his jaw tight. "He wants absolution," he'd said, handing it to Willow. She'd placed her hand over his, her touch grounding. "Let the music decide. We don't erase the past, we transform it." They accepted the funds, but named the wing the Room of Reckoning, a space for truth, not tribute. Its opening drew a crowd, including a frail man who'd once been a shipyard worker, his trembling hands clutching a violin older than the Institute. "I heard this place saves people," he said, his voice cracked by years of silence. Willow offered him a chair by an open window, her smile gentle. "It helps you remember who you are." As he played a halting melody, Lyra's future laughter seemed to blend with the notes, a bridge between generations. The conservatory's fame grew, its students, orphans, veterans, dreamers, carrying its mission beyond the city. Willow, once the girl in the plaza, was now a founder, her music a beacon for the lost. Preston, no longer the heir to a tainted empire, had become her partner in purpose, their love a quiet strength forged in truth. One afternoon, as Lyra's birth loomed, Willow led a recital, her violin weaving a new piece for the students. Preston stood in the back, watching her sway, the necklace catching the light. She'd told him once he'd arrived late, but he'd stayed, and that was enough. Outside, the wind carried their music into the street, brushing the feet of strangers as it had years ago. But now, no one wondered who Willow was. She was the composer, the mother, the muse, and Preston was the man who'd chosen her over a legacy of lies. Together, they'd built a symphony of purpose, its notes echoing far beyond the plaza where their story began. Thank you for joining Willow and Preston on this unforgettable journey through love, loss, and redemption. As their melody fades, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did their story stir your heart? Share your reflections in the comments. Rate it 0-10 and tell us where you're listening from. Has a lost love ever found its way back to you? Your voices make these stories come alive, and we're so grateful for every moment you spend with us. Until the next tale, let the music linger in your dreams, and we'll meet again soon for another story to light the night. Sweet dreams, listeners.